I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. And thank you so much for coming today and spending this 1 hour with us. I'm also honorary captain of the Royal Canadian Navy, appointed by Canada's Defence Minister, and so proud to serve our country in that role. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of our Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tawasin First Nations. And we are here today to meet with the very popular just to have an amazing conversation with Canada's outgoing finance critic. And he is going to have a new role, very important to Canada's economic recovery in the form of jobs and industry. And I'd like to thank Pierre Poilievre for joining us in Surrey, British Columbia today digitally. Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia very soon. And I just wanted to also indicate that this event is co-hosted by the Cloverdale Chamber of Commerce and the South Surrey White Rock Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for your partnership to both of you. Ladies and gentlemen, events like this simply do not happen without sponsorship. Thank you so much to our presenting sponsor, the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, and our business and international trade center sponsors, the law firm of Fasken, the Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan represented by S&F Benefits, and BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada. Thank you so much for supporting this event and the Surrey Board of Trade's Business and International Trade Center. On our Zoom call today, I'd like to recognize some government officials in the audience. Thank you so much for attending. Kenny Chu, MP for Steveston, Richmond. Carrie Lynn Finley, MP for South Surrey, White Rock. Tamara Jansen, MP for Cloverdale, Langley City. Taco Von Popta, MP for Langley, Aldergrove. His Worship Richard Stewart, Mayor of Coquitlam. His Worship Daryl Walker, Mayor of White Rock. And our City of Surrey councillors Linda Annis and Stephen Pettigrew. Thank you for joining us. Just some instructions before we begin. All attendees are muted. If you have a question, put it in the chat function of the technology and we will get to your question. If we don't have time, a response will be sent to you after the event is over. Now, I also wanted to indicate that the Surrey Board of Trade, we have BC's only pandemic rapid response business center in British Columbia. We are one of 9 organizations that sit on the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force. We are part of the BC Minister's Economic Recovery COVID Engagement Industry Task Force, meeting on the occasion with Dr. Bonnie Henry, BC's Provincial Health Officer, to identify gaps and opportunities during this pandemic. And during the pandemic, we've also had a direct line into the Prime Minister's office to do the very same thing, to identify gaps and opportunities for the economy, for businesses. And we have been here, all chambers of commerce, all boards of trades, all 450 of us in our nation, to ensure that our business community is connected and that we are an agent to instigate change at all levels of government. Thank you so much for attending, ladies and gentlemen, and now I'd like to welcome our presenting sponsor representative from the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Please help me welcome Evangeline Inglesos. Evangeline, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anita, and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, thank you for taking the time to attend this very important conversation on Canada's economic recovery and upcoming federal budget. As Canada's largest port, the Port of Vancouver is a major contributor to our country's economic prosperity. Port activity supports 115,000 port and supply chain jobs across Canada. The port is also critical to many more jobs and industries across Canada that depend on it for their importing and exporting needs so that they can build thriving communities and businesses. Our role as the Port Authority is to ensure goods are moved safely, efficiently, and sustainably through the port, which contributes greatly to a prosperous economy and healthy communities. And trade through the port has been growing steadily for the past decade, in part because the port is very resilient. And there's a couple of factors that cause that resiliency. The first is the diversity of the cargo that's handled by port terminals. And the second is the access that the port provides to more than 170 countries around the globe, keeping Canadians and Canadian businesses connected to essential goods and international markets. And we've seen the benefit of the port's resilience in tough economic times. We saw it during the recession of 2008 and 2009, after which trade did bounce back strongly. And thankfully, we're seeing it again now throughout the COVID-19 pandemic with the cargo throughput through the port. The port's continuing strong performance is enabling the Port Authority to move forward despite the pandemic, with major infrastructure projects supporting our regional economic recovery. I'm grateful for the strong partnerships between the port and our partners, both government and industry, and we all look forward to working together to keep Canada and BC strong and competitive. I'm now pleased to say that our speaker today is a former minister, a 5-term member of Parliament, and is the outgoing Conservative Shadow Minister of Finance and incoming Shadow Minister for Jobs and Industry. He champions the free market in which everyone gets ahead on merit and people take ownership of and responsibility for their own destinies. He also champions jobs for people with disabilities, introducing a bill that would allow workers on disability assistance to keep more in wages. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Pierre Poilievre.
Thank you very much, Evangeline and Anita, for your introduction and for putting on this excellent meeting. Thank you also to my fellow Conservative colleagues who are joining this call: Tamara Jensen, Teiko Van Popta, Kenny Chu, Carrie Lynn Finley, Nellie Shin, and I'm told that His Worship Darrell Walker, the Mayor of White Rock, is with us as well. So I'd like to bring greetings from Ottawa to all of them. If I've missed anything, missed anyone, my sincere apologies. In fact, it was Tamara Jensen who reached out to me about 3 weeks ago and said, "Pierre, do you believe in free speech?" I said, "Yes." She said, "How would you like to give one?" And that's how I ended up here today making this presentation. Tamara has been a brilliant member of the Finance Committee, holding the government to account and fighting for our entrepreneurs and small businesses throughout the fall. And the community is very blessed to have her as a representative. And boy, do we ever need representation now more than ever on the important economic files. Let me describe for you what I believe is the post-pandemic crisis in the making. Right now, Canada has a 387% debt to GDP ratio. That is to say, we have $3.87 of debt for every $1 of economic output. This is by far a record for Canada. It is twice our historic average. It is the second highest in all of the G7, behind only Japan. But Japan has a much higher savings rate, which is a mitigating factor against this kind of problem. And it is means that for every 1 percentage point increase in the effective interest rate that Canadians pay in the future, interest will consume almost 4% more of our GDP. Now, this debt is comprised of 3 parts. There is the household debt, which is the highest in the G7 by far. It's now just over $2 trillion, and we now have more household debt in Canada than we have GDP. Then you have corporate debt. It is also just over $2 trillion, and that is if you exclude financial institutions like banks. And that too now exceeds, for the first time ever, the size of the Canadian economy. And then you have government debt. Again, if you add up all of the gross debt from the three levels of government right across the country, it is also just over $2 trillion, which again is by itself bigger than the entire economy. And that is the first time that that has ever happened. It happened this year. So we're increasing our debt levels at spectacular rate. And in fact, we have a higher debt to GDP ratio than the Americans did during the subprime debt crisis of 08-09, and bigger than Greece did when it had a massive government debt crisis and bankruptcy just over a decade ago. The only thing that's saving us from a crisis right now is that interest rates are low. But of course, we don't know how long that will last, and rates could rise at any time, and those rates will multiply against a record debt level. So you can survive record debts if you have record low rates. You cannot survive record debts if you have normal levels of interest rates, which would be more than double what we're paying right now. So that is the challenge I believe we face. If rates rise before we reduce this debt ratio, then we will face a serious financial crisis that could impact not just the livelihoods, but it could force bankruptcies, massive foreclosures on homes, maybe even certain government financial failures that could lead to crisis in our system. So the problem we have then is, how do we reduce our debt ratio before rates rise? Now, remember, this is a ratio, so it has a numerator and a denominator. The numerator is our debt, and the denominator is our economy. So there are two ways to reduce the ratio. One is to grow that denominator, the economic output of our GDP. The other is to shrink, or can at least contain, the numerator. So how do we do those two things? The answer really is comes down to Benjamin Franklin's great maxim of frugality and industry. We need to contain our expenditures at the same time as we expand our income through industry. And that's where you come in. You represent the industrial sectors of the Surrey region. You represent the hardworking entrepreneurs who produce more and more income for our workers and our entrepreneurial sector. So think of it this way. You have two kinds of income: business income and personal income. And right now in Canada, we are hampered by the fact that we have very low levels of investment. So our workers are the best in the world, but they do not have the best tools and equipment in the world. Let me just share with you a very powerful statistic explaining why why it is that our workers lack those tools. Right now, in Canada, the average worker enjoys $15,000 of investment every year. By contrast, in the OECD, there is $21,000 of investment per worker. In the States, it's $26,000 of investment per worker. That investment buys machines, computers, software, intellectual property, factories, other things that workers use to produce income for both themselves and the underlying business. And so what's happening in Canada right now is that hundreds of billions of dollars of investment are pouring into the United States and other foreign jurisdictions that welcome it, and pouring out of Canada. And that means that our competitors are building better factories, fancier machines, more productive software and technology, while their workers, as a result, are earning more and more income. Only 5 years ago, the gap between US per capita GDP and Canadian per capita GDP was $11,000. In just 5 years, that gap has grown to $14,000. So that means wages, folks. That means our workers are not keeping up with their American counterparts because our workers are deprived of the tools, the money, the jobs, and the business is leaving our country for more attractive destinations. And so the question is, how do we bring that investment back to Canada? Well, here's where I'd like to highlight a kind of Freakonomics opportunity, something that is unexpectedly positive out of COVID. Because of the fact that people were not able to spend money during the lockdown months and businesses were the same, they were able to save an extraordinary amount of money. So Canadian household, I'm reading now from BNN, Canadian households and businesses are holding on to more than $170 billion of excess cash, they reported of a study. Households are holding on to 90 billion, which is equal to 4% of consumer spending, while businesses are holding on to no less than 80 billion. So you've got this big pile of cash. Now, what do we do with it? So our finance minister has said she considers it a preloaded stimulus and she wants the government to unlock it so that it can be used for consumer spending and other governmental expenditures. In other words, let's consume, go out and just spend. Now, that sounds very tempting until you think about the fact that we shouldn't confuse activity with achievement. It might create some short-term activity if we went out and spent a bunch of money like we've been doing for so many years, building up our credit card debts, but it would leave no lasting economic asset that would go on producing income to support our debts, to feed our families, to put roofs over heads, and to fund schools, hospitals, and roads. Rather, what we need is for that money to convert into investment, income producing investments. Again, factories, softwares, patents, other things that produce more income for Canadians are especially what we need. We need to unleash the power of our free enterprise system so that our businesses can make more, produce more, and pay more wages, because there's literally only one solution to the forthcoming debt crisis that I warned of at the outset, and it is this: paychecks. Solid, growing paychecks. That's simple, but not easy. So how do we do it? How do we encourage investment so that our businesses create more paychecks? The answer is, let's make Canada the fastest place on planet Earth in which to get a building permit for a factory, a warehouse, a mine, a pipeline, a shopping center, an office building, or any other piece of economic infrastructure. Right now, it takes about 170 days longer to get a building permit in Canada than it does in the United States. We are ranked 34th out of 35 OECD nations for speed of approvals of building projects. So let's put our three government levels of government together around the single goal to be the fastest place on earth in which to get a yes or no to an application to build something. That would unleash our construction sector, our steel sector, our energy sector to build economic infrastructure and bring our resources to market. Let's reform our tax and benefit system to reward rather than punish work. Right now, according to a Finance Canada report, a middle class worker earning about $55,000 a year, who is a single parent, could lose up to 80 cents of the next dollar she earns because she gets clawed back on her child benefit, plus some other benefits from the province get clawed back. And then she pays payroll taxes, income taxes, gas taxes to get to work. And when all is said and done, she loses 80 cents on the dollar. So this is a major penalty, a fine almost, that our workers are paying for the crime of productively earning themselves a paycheck. Let's reform the system so people always keep more money in their pockets from working. The federal government should also fast track decisions on about $40 billion worth of energy and resource projects that are awaiting federal sign-off. For example, the $14 billion LNG gas plant in the Saguenay region is going to create major employment for Quebecers. The Tech Frontier mine in northern Alberta, that for which the permit is still up for a decision. It could be approved and Tech Frontier could build that mine or sell the permit to someone else. That's a $20 billion project. We should fast track the approval of natural gas projects that are very important to British Columbia. BC is home to the biggest single private sector infrastructure investment in Canadian history, LNG Canada, which is going to liquefy literally billions of cubic feet of natural gas and ship it to the world. We have 1,220 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in Canada. We should be bringing that to the surface, piping it safely to liquefaction facilities, which work well in a cold climate, because that's how you turn a gas into a liquid, put it on a ship and get it off to Asian markets, which just happen to be closer to Canada than they are from American energy ports. We should also, by the way, that would reduce global greenhouse gases by displacing foreign coal-fired electricity and using clean, green Canadian natural gas instead. We should do what Manny Jules, the former chief from Kamloops, said, that which is to remove the regulatory and tax penalties that block First Nations communities from building enterprises and developing resources that would unleash the potential of their population, which is the youngest population in the world. Let them build beautiful commercial enterprises with their own community leading the way and reaping the rewards. Let's repeal C-69, the No New Pipelines bill, and end the West Coast export ban on Canadian energy. Something that's totally contradictory. We allow foreign vessels carrying foreign energy to go through our waters, but not allow Canadian energy to go off to more lucrative foreign markets to create jobs here at home. Let's repeal that ban and open up our energy sector to the world. The federal government could also bring the provinces together to push occupational licensing bodies to quickly recognize the credentials of foreign trained but highly qualified immigrant doctors, mechanics, architects, and other skilled newcomers who now face unacceptable bureaucratic delays that prevent them from serving their community to their full potential and earning a paycheck for which they are qualified. When we were in government as Conservatives, we helped support a micro lending program run by private sector to give low interest loans to immigrant professionals and tradespeople so that they could get licensed to practice. In some cases, they went from being serving coffee to being doctors in under a year because they were already educated in their medical field in a foreign country. All they needed was to get their paperwork, and having that paperwork meant that their salaries would go up 300%, 400%, 500%. Imagine how much good that would do for not just themselves, but for our tax revenues and our economy. So what we need to do is unleash the power of savings, investment, and work. Unleash the free enterprise system and move from a credit card economy to a paycheck economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pierre. You know, today the Prime Minister announced close to $15 billion in transportation investments across our country. And by 2026, there's going to be a $3 billion permanent transit fund. In either of your roles, can you comment on, is this going to instigate infrastructure investments? Is it going to instigate job creation? Is it going to reduce the federal government debt?
Well, it definitely won't reduce the federal government debt. I think by definition, if he's planning to spend this money on the national credit card again, but that's if money actually gets spent. Remember, this is an announcement that's 5 years away. So he's making the announcement today with a great big photo op, and then he's going to, presumably, if he wins 2 more elections, he claims that he will make this expenditure a half decade from now. But what is interesting about all of his talk about infrastructure spending is that the parliamentary budget officer found that it didn't actually occur. Yes, the federal budget for infrastructure went up, but what happened is that the provinces and municipalities actually cut back their infrastructure budgets and just used the federal money to displace provincial and municipal dollars that would otherwise have been spent. So if the province was going to fund, a provincial road, what they did is they took the money from the federal infrastructure increase and built the very same road they were already going to build, but reduced their own contribution, pocketed the money, and spent it on we don't know what. But it ultimately, the money did not trickle down from Ottawa to the province to the city to the road. It simply got gobbled up along the way. So there's always a big difference between what politicians announce or even what they budget and what actually gets done. We should also be thinking about how we can build infrastructure more affordably. The goal should not be to jump up and down and say, look, our infrastructure plan is the most expensive in world history. Even Caesar Augustus didn't spend this much money on Roman roads. So we should have a Roman triumph and celebrate me as the most expensive prime minister in Canadian history. That's not how you get results. That's not how your members run their businesses. They don't brag that your members don't brag that their products and services are the most expensive. I mean, find me a restaurant owner in your organization that says, come dine with us. We'll charge you more than any of our competitors. No, they say, we'll give you value for money. You'll get the best meal at the best service for the lowest price. That's what government should be doing, not bragging about big fat price tags.
Pierre, one of the key ingredients in the overall recipe for economic recovery is to build international relationships. My first question to you on that is, we're really focused on the Cascadia Economic Corridor. We're a border city here in Surrey. I was very intrigued that your leader for the Conservative Party indicated the call for a creation of a special Canada-US Relations Committee, because you can't just turn the border on with a light switch. The
Right.
border has been closed. Can you tell us your perspective on that?
Well, you make a great point, Anita. We have an incredibly lucrative trade relationship with the United States of America. It represents almost 40% of our GDP. It is still the biggest economy in the world, and we need unrestricted access to its market. Trudeau's failed on Canada-US relations. We don't have a softwood deal, even though Harper had secured one when he was in power. We don't have an exemption from Buy America, so our construction companies can't compete on subnational building projects in the US, even though, again, Harper got an exemption from that when he was in power. And of course, Biden just killed the Keystone Pipeline, which will cost us billions of dollars every year in losses, not just for Alberta, but for all of Canada. So major diplomatic setbacks in our relationship that are extremely expensive for Canadians. We need a return to professional diplomacy to deliver real results to our workers and bring our wages up to the same level as our international competitors. In fact, hopefully higher. We also want to advance the CANZUK concept, which is a free trade with the UK, the Australians, the New Zealanders, the four Anglospheric countries. We want to expand our trade with India, the second most populous nation on planet Earth, with which we have tremendous people-to-people ties. We have huge linguistic advantage by virtue of the fact that our people, we have so many wonderful newcomers in Canada who originated in the Indian subcontinent. Now they give us inroads into that marketplace. So listen, I think we have an incredible opportunity to give our customers a world of choice and our businesses a world of customers. We need a big, open, free market economy to make it happen.
Well, we do need to focus on international investment. We're in a very globally competitive arena, and we do need to make sure that Canada is open for business to international investors. Tell me your thoughts about the resource sector as an ingredient in economic recovery.
Well, it is a very important ingredient in our recovery. In fact, it's our single biggest net export by far. No other industry even comes close. It's the number one source of investment, the number one source of R&D. I think, I could be wrong, but I think it's the number one private sector employer of First Nations people. It has taken a major blow over the last 5 years. Even as American energy has more than doubled in production over the last decade, ours has crashed. Look, some people dream about a day when there will be no more petroleum used on planet Earth. Well, maybe that day is off in some distant future, but the International Economic Agency predicts 100 million, 60 to 100 million barrels of oil consumed every single day for the next 2 decades. So whose oil do we want consumed? Saudi oil, Venezuelan oil, Algerian oil, or clean green Canadian oil? We have lower emissions per barrel of oil than the global average. That means that when we displace a global barrel of oil with a Canadian barrel, we actually reduce the net emissions that result. We have the world's only carbon negative oil company. Whitecap Resources now puts more carbon back into the ground where it came from than it puts into the air through its production of oil. So why aren't we celebrating these environmental breakthroughs and unleashing the massive job and wealth creating potential that it brings, rather than strangling the industry to death by blocking its pipeline construction?
Pierre, is it a good idea to increase the capital gains inclusion rate in the upcoming federal budget?
No.
Just a question from the audience.
No.
Tell me your thoughts about, people have savings. Some people have savings during this pandemic. Do you think they will invest or will they consume?
That's a great question, Anita. I think you raise a very important question. So, according to the Bank of Canada, 80% of Canada's economic growth over the next 3 or 4 years will be from government spending and consumption, and less than 20% will be from net exports and investment. That's very bad news, because consumption, either by households or governments, does not leave permanent assets. It doesn't leave a factory or a patent or some other piece of economic infrastructure that pays income into the future. When you consume it, it's gone. And the only thing that remains is the debt. So we need to steer people more towards investment, and we need businesses to start to invest more. So the stock market, for example, in Canada reached 120% of GDP. In other words, our stock market, the TSX, I should say, was valued at 20 percentage points above the value of our entire GDP. That's never happened before. So at the financial sector itself is swimming in cash. There's all kinds of cash up here in the stock market. What's not happening is that money's not trickling down into capital investment. So normally you would think of the stock market as a place to raise investment, to build a factory or buy machinery, but it hasn't happened yet. We need to see that financial sector, all that money that's in finance, get into the real economy to build powerful income producing assets that will pay wages and paychecks to our people.
Pierre, during the pandemic, we have been saying that we can't afford another economic shutdown. We see a light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine rollout, and certainly there's challenges related to that. But I wanted to get your perspective on, how different governments across the country are shutting down economies or halting economies, of course, in the name of health and safety, very important. But could there be another solution? What would your party have done?
You're saying another solution instead of lockdowns?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there are 3 things. One, we should have closed our borders much earlier. Our military briefed the cabinet that in December of 2019 that there was a major pandemic outbreak in China and that we should take action to stop it from coming here. And in the 3 months that followed, the Trudeau government allowed 60,000 people to come into Canada from China, including 2,000 from Wuhan, from whence the pandemic originated. And when people stood up in the House and said, "Please close the borders," he said, "No. That is." He claimed that was racist. Well, then he changed his mind and decided it was necessary, but not before the pandemic was raging through our own country. The second thing is we would have approved rapid testing. Rapid testing allows us to know whether or not, for example, long-term care worker is COVID infected, keep them at home rather than having them bring it in to the seniors home. High contact workers like waitresses and others could be tested and told, if you are positive, go home or go for care. But if you're negative, then you can go to work. We could have been doing rapid testing for air passengers so that people wouldn't fly the disease around, and we could have kept more of our planes in the air and our airline workers with jobs. And then finally, we would have, instead of wasting desperately needed months, precious months, by trying to sign a vaccine deal with CanSino, a Chinese company, while a country with whom we have a hostage standoff, we would have gone right to European and American companies and in addition to that, produced our own vaccines here from the very start. That way we wouldn't be ranked 35 in the world for per capita vaccination rates. So those are three things we could have done to limit the number of lockdowns that have ravaged our economies.
Pierre, here in Surrey, and certainly this is happening, and the message is locally that, we have a thriving construction and development sector in Surrey. We have the greatest number of manufacturers in British Columbia, many of them doing well, were able to stay open even during the pandemic lockdowns. But so some industries are doing well, but they can't compensate for those industries that are not doing well. What's your perspective on that?
Well, it's very difficult to say, Anita. I can't claim that any politician will have a solution for some of the sectors that have been rocked by this pandemic. I do think one of the positive policies out of Ottawa has been the wage subsidy. It maintains a relationship between worker and employer, even when the employer is largely shut down. It keeps jobs in place so that when the economy opens up, they'll still be there. You won't have to start from scratch with workers struggling to find employers and employers struggling to find workers. They'll still be attached. So I think we need to maintain the wage subsidy as long as necessary to get through the pandemic slowdown. And we also need to remove some of the pre-existing barriers to economic growth, like the ones I listed in my speech, so that we have other industries that hire. Maybe they could be hiring more people than they had before. There's some industries that are taking off. Parcel delivery, for example. That's just one example. There's some technological sectors that might actually have more employment than they did pre-COVID, and that will partly compensate for those that have less.
Pierre, do we really need to be worried about reducing the government debt? From our perspective, we do, as a pathway towards economic recovery and investor confidence. But some economists are saying that you don't need to worry about it. What's your perspective?
Well, I think the don't worry, be happy mentality is extremely dangerous. Right now, we have exceptionally low and unsustainably low interest rates. They're not going to stay there forever. So it is possible to have $2 trillion worth of gross governmental debt if interest rates are at the very rock bottom. But as soon as they pop up, all of a sudden, you've got massive new expenses. Just to put it into perspective, with $2 trillion in debt, combined, every 1 percentage point increase equals $20 billion of costs to the government. So let's say that rates were to go up 4 points. Well, do the math. That's $80 billion, which is a phenomenal amount of money. It's almost 5% of our GDP. It's double what the federal government spends on healthcare. It's 4 times what the government spends on military. And it would all just be going to financial lenders rather than to Canadians' services and products. And in addition to that, it's not just government debt we have to support. We have this unbelievable amount of personal and corporate debt that will also take a massive hit when rates start to rise. So I'm not suggesting we need major spending cuts at this point. What we need to do is slow the growth of government spending below the growth of the economy so that the economy can catch up with the debt and reduce it progressively. And that's why our leader has proposed a 10-year plan to phase out the deficit, but also a pro-growth agenda that includes big, fat, strong paychecks. So our people are contributing more into the treasury. They're able to pay off their own debts and to secure our future in the process.
Pierre, what we've seen during the pandemic is the advent of different types of currency, such as Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, blockchain paradigms.
Right.
What are your thoughts about those types of currencies and our Canadian dollar, in fact?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think well, first of all asset markets have gone ballistic because central banks are printing so much money. Money supply growth across the Western world has been spectacular. This year we've had the biggest growth in money supply, depending on the measure, since at least the early 1980s. In fact, the growth in the number of bills, like actual hard cash, has been bigger this year than any other year in history, even though we're using less cash than ever. But that's just because governments are printing money. So this has caused a lot of people to speculate that national fiat currencies can't be trusted. That's what they argue. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I don't know. And they're looking for alternatives. And one of them is that they're looking at is Bitcoin. They argue, and I don't know the facts, so I'm just relaying them, that this is a currency with a limited supply. There can only be 21 million of them ever generated, that it's increasingly expensive to make each successive Bitcoin coin, and therefore, unlike fiat currencies, owners of this crypto can be confident that their ownership won't be diluted by overproduction of the currency. Frankly, I don't know. I mean, I've had people tell me I should buy it. I haven't bought it. But I do think, this is what I do know, that there's a long history of governments, kings, emperors, politicians printing money to pay for their spending. And it never ends well. It never ends well. So I hope that this is a short-term experiment and that we get back to sound money as soon as possible, because we cannot print our way out of this. It has been tried by the Mesopotamians, the Romans, the French under Louis the 15th and the Duke of Orleans. It was tried by the Weimar Republic. I could go on and on and on of where it's been tried to pay your bills with printed money and created cash. It never ends well. We need sound money and real economic output rather than just money creation.
Pierre, let's turn to the oil and gas sector. We need climate policies that efficiently and effectively manage GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, while maintaining our competitiveness. If our Canadian oil and gas industry is not able to remain competitive with our global competitors, there's a risk that oil production is going to go to these lower cost jurisdictions where in these areas they have lesser environmental regulations.
Mm-hmm.
What is the Canadian opportunity?
Well, it's massive, Anita. Like I said at the outset, the International Energy Agency says we're going to have 60 to 100 million barrels of oil consumed every single day for at least the next 2 decades. That's till 2040. In fact, oil prices are back up. They're up, I think, $56. I thought I saw yesterday. I've seen speculation by some of the serious financial companies that oil could go to 60, 70, $80 a barrel. We could be prospering off of those very high prices. And instead, we're allowing the Americans and frankly, many dictatorships in other parts of the world to profit at our expense because of our own economic sadomasochism. The Trudeau government has blocked 2 pipelines. They outright vetoed Northern Gateway, which would have taken about 500,000 barrels a day from northern Alberta through to the northwest coast, Pacific coast. and he blocked the Energy East pipeline, which would have taken 1 million barrels of Western oil to Eastern refineries. And so those same Eastern refineries now are buying Saudi Arabian and Middle East oil instead of buying Canadian oil. It's an outrage. It killed jobs for Central Canadian steel workers who would have built the thing, for Western Canadian resource workers, and for Eastern Canadian refinery workers. And meanwhile, we have the second biggest oil reserve on planet Earth, the most advanced technology and environmental policies with which to produce it, and we're leaving it in the ground to enrich foreign jurisdiction. I think it's an outrage. And you go to the countryside of the prairies these days, it's a human tragedy we're seeing unfold. Young men killing themselves, overdosing on opioids because they have no hope, they have no idea what they're going to do with themselves. They have no future. Everything they've been trained to do is being robbed from them by government policies that are deliberately designed to shut down the sector. So we need to reverse those policies, bring our energy sector roaring back, and give paychecks to those great young men and women.
Pierre, I want to talk about the creative industry. And yes, in the Metro Vancouver area in Surrey, we have a thriving film industry. But in general, the arts and culture industry has been hit hard by the pandemic. It really is the foundation of making a city. At the Surrey Board of Trade, we have a Surrey Music City office where we are encouraging not only encouragement of their trade, but also entrepreneurship as a musician. What is your party's direction and paradigm for supports for the arts and culture industry, for the events industry, once we can get up and running?
That's a very good question, Anita. As you know, the artistic and creative sectors have been largely have faced serious challenges. I wouldn't say they've all been decimated, because those that can still produce and provide their content digitally have been able to continue. But any who in-person performances, of course, have been impossible now for almost a year, which has just wiped out incredible artistic companies and organizations, and the brilliant producers that provide us with music, poetry, theater, and all other art forms. So what conservatives are proposing is, let's get people vaccinated as soon as possible so that performances can return. The Super Bowl had, I think, 20,000 Americans in person. Now, I think they were probably mostly vaccinated. That's because their vaccine rates are very high in the States. Here, we can't do those sorts of things because we haven't vaccinated our population yet. So we need an incredible focus on getting Canadians vaccinated so that these wonderful performances can return and our Canadian artists can thrive again.
Pierre, what are your thoughts about Canada's pension system?
So look, there's a lot of good things to celebrate. In the 1990s, the Chrétien-Martin Liberals did something very wise. They turned the CPP into a professionally managed and politically independent pension fund. So our CPP now is invested on the basis of, it has one mandate: to maximize the return without undue risk. And so we've now grown the CPP from next to nothing 25 years ago to almost $500 billion. So we've got that money invested in that fund. And I think, frankly, first of all, keep the politicians away from it. No political meddling. People like me, people like Justin Trudeau have no business in it. Let the professionals continue to invest and grow that money for Canadians. So that's a success. OAS and GIS are give us a nice floor. It's not as much as we wish we had for our low-income seniors, but it does provide a floor. And then we have the private savings sides, where I think we have some other great things to celebrate. TFSAs are a wonderful achievement. Jim Flaherty brought it in, and millions of Canadians now have those as their principal tool for saving for the future. I think we need to make Canada a more attractive place to invest, so that more of the cash that goes into TFSAs gets invested in Canadian companies that create Canadian jobs. That would be a virtuous circle if folks could be preparing for their retirement by deploying their capital to create jobs for other people in our very own country. That being said, I think one area we need to be careful is that the Trudeau Liberals attempted to raise taxes on the passive investment of private business owners. So business owners who earn money and set aside some of the cash in stocks, bonds, mutual funds. He tried to impose a 73% tax on that investment income. I think that is totally wrong. We need to let our small businesses keep a nest egg within the corporate structure so that if something unexpected, like, I don't know, a pandemic comes along, they have cash there. But if there isn't an unexpected problem, then that cash can act as their retirement income. So let's protect the ability of our business owners to save within their companies.
Pierre, my final question to you is, what is your perspective on an inclusive recovery? So childcare investments, so more women can pursue career and entrepreneurship opportunities so that the gap between the rich and the poor isn't widened any further.
Listen, for me, everything comes down to paychecks. Only a paycheck is the ticket out of poverty. At the end of the day, the best anti-poverty program is a good job. Only paychecks can fund childcare, nutritious food, housing, and everything else. So we need to unleash the productive forces of our economy to pay out more paychecks to work to our people. I'm very worried, Anita, about a very specific group of Canadians right now. They are the people in the lowest income quintile, so the lowest fifth of income earners, between the ages of 46 and 65. I've looked at the data, and this group of people has $5 of debt for every $1 of income, which is a staggering amount of debt. They're also the people who were most likely to lose their job in the pandemic. So you think of the 51-year-old waitress. She's never done any other job her whole life, and God bless her, she's a wonderful waitress, and that's a dignified, honorable job. But the problem is her restaurant might not reopen. She has $5 of debt for every dollar of income. So let's say she has $40,000 of income, but $200,000 of debt. What is she going to do if the restaurant doesn't open? What if her restaurant owner says, I can't come back. I've been knocked out by COVID. I've been out, they shut me down for 2 years. I don't have any more cash. Let's say she's 52 years old. She's not going to be able to retrain. She can't go back to university and have a brand new job. There are millions of, actually, it's almost exactly 1 million households that are in this category, ages 46 to 65, lowest income quintile. And this group of people, they don't have savings for their retirement. This group of people are going to be in a lot of trouble. And our urgent priority needs to be to get them back to work in good wage-paying jobs that will allow them to protect their finances and their future.
Any final words before we close the meeting?
Well, I just want to thank you, Anita, for putting on this great conversation with your members. I'm so thankful that they took some time out of their day to be with us. I want to thank Tamara Jensen again for having invited me. And Tamara agreed that if I went on today's meeting, that next time you would invite me to come in person. And I get to come back out to beautiful British Columbia. I grew up in Alberta, actually, so we used to be in BC almost every summer, and I can't wait to get back to see you all in the flesh, in real time, and have a great conversation and break bread together.
Thank you so much, Pierre. And absolutely, we'll be inviting you to be here in Surrey in person. And remember, Surrey is an opportunity city, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you so much to our presenting sponsor, the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Check out businessinsurrey.com for all of our upcoming events and COVID-19 supports. Make it a great business day